Chapter 21, Air versus Water. Philip watched as a dozen men loaded the supplies he had rented onto the chartered steam-powered tugboat. The captain, a Dutchman named Beekman, had spent the last 10 years in the San Francisco Bay working salvage jobs and towing broken-down and derelict ships. He had on staff 2 skilled divers that would descend to the bottom of the bay where the Queen Anne's Revenge was said to lie. The tug was now outfitted with 2 air pumps that would fill 2 large bladders the size of hot air balloons that the divers would place inside the hull of the ship. Once the air was pumped inside, it should displace the water and allow the ship to rise. The tugboat could then pull it toward shallow water, and the ship could be careened so repairs could be made. He looked over at the 2 dark-skinned pirates as they walked along the deck of the tugboat, admiring the vessel. Philip was quite surprised when Edward Thatch's first mate, Black Caesar, showed up with thousands of dollars in silver this morning. Philip had done as he was asked to do, finding and hiring a salvager that could possibly do the job that Thatch had asked for, but he honestly expected the whole ordeal to be a farce. Now here he was in modern times, standing with 2 pirates born in the late 1600s, preparing to raise a 200-ton 17th-century frigate off the bottom of bay. Beekman was watching the pirates as well, especially the exotic beauty Charlotte de Berry. He stood on 2 bow legs that belonged on a horseman rather than a sailor, and leaned against the pilot house entryway smoking an ivory-bowled pipe. He used the pipe to point toward Charlotte. "You, lass, you were in the hold when the ship went down?" "Aye, that I was." "How large was the hole that took her down?" Beekman asked, sticking the pipe back into the side of his mouth. "Cannon size," Charlotte responded dryly. "Mm-hmm. And you all have a good idea where she lies?" "We do." Black Caesar handed over a map of the bay with an X marking the approximate spot where the Queen Anne had gone down. Beekman looked at the map, then out toward the direction the spot indicated. He then rolled the map up and handed it back to Black Caesar. "Then let's be off," Beekman said. "We are waiting for 2 others and the boy," Philip said. Black Caesar had sent the cabin boy back for the 2 pirates waiting in the stable for the rest of their crew. He didn't want to be so greatly outnumbered if they were able to raise the ship with all of Captain Blackbeard's treasure on board. The boy left an hour ago on his errand, and Philip had given him an additional stop at the Paris to see if Colette's network of little birds had news regarding the whereabouts of Thatch and the other missing party members. Colette's pretty waitresses were a reliable source of information, as men's lips seemed to loosen while in their divine company. It was as if Colette had instructed them on the arts of subtle interrogation, and Colette, being the ever-smart businesswoman, knew that information could be the most valuable asset. It wasn't long before Philip spotted Charles Vane, Mary Reed, and the cabin boy striding along the dock toward them. "A heavy ship without sails you hired, scientist? Going to take hours to move us out there, and I'll not be rowing such an ugly beast as this," Vane said after looking the tugboat over. Philip ignored the comment, figuring the act of sailing the ship would prove its worth better than trying to explain how the steam-powered tug operated to the likes of Vane. Instead, Philip made the introductions of the newcomers to Captain Beekman, and the ship was prepared to depart. The loud coughing and roar of the steam engine as it started up had taken the pirates by surprise. They all flinched and crouched, expecting the boat to explode like it was hit by a heated round shot. They tentatively watched the smokestack in the middle of the ship belch black smoke into the air. Once the engine was running smoothly, Beekman gently throttled the tug away from the dock and motored out past the moored ships and into the larger San Francisco Bay. The pirates were in complete awe at the power of the tug and moved from fore to aft and port to starboard, looking over the side rails, staring at the churning water as the steam-powered screw pushed the tug faster and faster through the cold water. It took just 15 minutes for the tugboat to reach the search area where Black Caesar directed them to go. Beekman slowed the boat to a crawl, and they began to search in a grid pattern for a sign of the Queen Anne's Revenge. There was a bit of arguing between the pirates as they all had an opinion on where the ship went down. They pointed out landmarks, and Charlotte was immediately insulted when Vane accused her of being half-blind and untrustworthy of spotting anything visually beyond a yardarm. Philip pulled the Chinese boy aside and asked him what he'd found out at the Paris. The boy told him that everyone was gossiping about the train robbery, and it was rumored that the James gang was involved. Miss Colette told him 2 men were reported to be captured and held in the city's jail. It wasn't believed that either of the 2 men were Frank or Jesse James. The 2 men caught were likely to end up on the gallows, since several men were killed during the robbery. Philip complimented the boy and handed him a silver dollar for his work. The boy pocketed the coin and went to join the pirates. If it wasn't the James brothers in that jail cell, and the news made no mention of a woman being caught, then it was definitely Edward Thatch and Benjamin Hornigold they were holding. For reasons he couldn't explain, Philip felt a strong desire to help rescue the pirate captains. It could be that he felt a natural kinship to his fellow Englishmen, but it was much more than that. His scientific mind was enthralled by the idea that these men and women somehow traveled through the cloak of time to arrive here. He wanted, no, needed, to find a way to explain it. He was also captivated with the mythology of their lives, and being close to them was the most exciting thing he could imagine. He knew that every moment he spent with them was a moment of danger and potential violence, but the longer he spent with them, the more it was like a drug he couldn't resist. Philip walked over to the divers' equipment to admire the cylinder air tanks that sat like metal pillows behind their backs. A hose went from the cylinder to the front of the diving helmet to supply breathable air. There was also a hose that went out of the cylinder and up to the boat to supply fresh air by way of a small hand-powered pump. The divers could stay safely submerged for around 30 minutes, he was told. As Philip looked over the equipment, his scientific mind was working out a way to improve the performance of the pumps by using a small piston engine that could be powered by electricity. If he could figure out a way to tap into the steam engine to generate the electricity. "Thar she is!" yelled Mary Read, interrupting Philip's train of thought from the port side of the boat. Everyone rushed to Mary's side to look down upon the Queen Anne's Revenge. The dark brown hull and 3 masts were easily seen from the surface of the water. Beekman powered down the tug and strode over to assess the job he was about to undertake. He chewed on the end of his pipe while he moved along the rail to see the entirety of the sunken frigate. The top of the mainmast was merely 10 feet below the surface. The rest of the ship was lying on the port side atop the sandy bottom. If the ship were upright, the mainmast would have probably broken the surface. "Amazing. Looks like a pirate ship. What year was this thing made?" Beekman asked. 1710, Black Caesar replied without taking his eyes off the ship. "Impossible. She'd have rotted and fallen apart by now," Beekman said. "Yet there she sits, and in great condition," Philip replied in a state of awe. "Besides the hole that be bigger than you," Charlotte said, standing beside the petite man. Philip looked up at her. "Well, we're going to fix that now, aren't we?" They all stared down as the tug slowly drifted over the wreck. The workmen and divers who joined them at the rail watched in silence, and one of the men drew the sign of the cross on his chest. No one talked for a moment until they drifted past. "Let's get cracking," Beekman said loudly through teeth clenched against his pipe. With that, the crew went about anchoring 10 yards away from the Queen Anne. They then worked on preparing the dive suits and equipment they were going to need to raise her up. Anne, Jesse, and Frank quietly entered the stable with guns drawn. The only sound was from the horses stirring in their stalls. They each took a direction and searched the building for any signs of their friends. They had ridden hard and fast into the night, putting as much distance as possible between them and the posse that had chased them. It was quickly apparent that Blackbeard and Hornigold had been caught or killed. Frank had said that there was a small chance they had just taken a different direction, but once they knew their pursuers had given up on them, it seemed clear that not all the pirates had gotten away. Anne and the James brothers had eventually stopped to rest their horses a while, before taking an out-of-the-way route back to San Francisco. "They were here. Their horses are boarded, so they're on foot," Jesse said. Frank was looking over the wagon that they had used in the heist. It was empty of supplies and loot. "We get goddamn double-crossed?" he asked. "Not sure. At least we know the wagon group didn't get caught," Jesse answered. "You think they made off with the silver?" he asked Anne. "They are pirates," Anne answered absently. She was looking around the room at the empty bottles of whiskey and signs of eating. Then, moving further into the stable, she looked at the tack wall that held assorted bridles, reins, and saddles. Anne ran her hand along a few items, then turned toward Frank and Jesse with a scowl. She was about to say something when she noticed a length of rope hanging from a hook on a post near the door. She walked over to the rope and touched the knot that was tied into it by another length of rope. "You boys seen this kind of knot before?" Anne asked. They walked over and looked at the rope and shook their heads. "What is it?" Jesse asked. A rolling hitch. Mary taught me how to tie it my first week sailing with her and Calico Jack. It's a slip knot for transferring weight from one rope to another. Use it on the rigging to stop the tension on a sheet. Can't imagine what use it would be to a horseman. What of it? Frank asked with irritation. It's a message. They made it back and are at the waterfront. She's saying she's on a boat, Anne said. All right then, let's search down there. They must have moved the silver and used some of it to hire the salvage boat. Come on, Jesse said, leading them out the stable doors. 20 minutes later, those same stable doors burst open, and a dozen armed men surged inside and quickly searched the building before Cooper, Jennings, and Rogers followed them in. The stables were empty but for the abandoned wagon and several horses in the stalls. One of Woods Rogers' Navy men picked up a whiskey bottle with an inch of liquid swirling at the bottom and smelled it. He looked at the fancy label and took a sip. Woods gave the man a harsh look that prompted the soldier to set the bottle back down. Cooper looked over the wagon and the horses in the stalls. Could be the same wagon. Horses looked like the ones we'd seen them on, but it was dark. Might be mistaken, he said. Most likely they were here, and maybe they will be back, said Jennings. Unless Hornigold lied, Rogers replied. He then looked around the room. He approached the pile of hay in the corner and began to use his boot to move the hay around. Cooper pointed to two of the Wells Fargo men. You two, find a spot across the way to keep an eye on this place in case they do return. Make sure you stay out of sight. He turned to Rogers as the man continued to nose around the haystack. You find something? Rogers looked up at Cooper, his scarred face unreadable. Place has a smell of pirates. I just smell horse shit, Cooper snarked. What's this? Jennings said. He made his way to the door. Cooper and Rogers followed to see what caught his attention. Jennings fingered the rope with the rolling hitch on it. It's a rope, Cooper said dryly. Don't have them where you're from? The knot is for a ship's rigging, Jennings said. What of it? Cooper asked. It's a knot only a sailor would tie, and you wouldn't use it here. It's a message, Jennings said. What kind of message can you say with a knot? Cooper asked. Jennings turned toward the Wells Fargo man and knitted his brows. The kind a pirate would understand, he said. That means they were here, Rogers said. Let's go pay another visit to our good Captain Hornigold. Beekman's two divers were brothers from Russia, Stefan and Peter. Neither minded the cold waters in the Bay of San Francisco since they grew up in the icy territory of southern Russia. They both wore insulated suits that kept out most of the water, but after 10 minutes of diving, you could feel the sea creeping underneath the water-resistant material. The two men had found the hole in the hull easily enough. They were able to swim inside the flooded compartment and see the chaos that the sudden flooding of seawater had created through the gloom. Once their eyes totally adjusted to the lack of light in the water-filled hold, they were able to make out the crates and wreckage that would need removal to get the bladders inside to fill with air. Peter made a note that the beams and structural supports were all in fine shape. This was quite a big job they were undertaking, and if the ship's integrity was in question, they would not attempt to bring it up for fear the vessel would crack in pieces. Stefan carefully moved about the area, making sure his air tether line was not getting twisted or hung up on anything. Stefan gave a hand signal to Peter that he would swim toward the back to inspect the area. Peter acknowledged and began to reconnoiter the crates and stores. Most of the crates were still intact, but a few were damaged with their contents spilt out lying near the container or floating nearby with bits and pieces of wood and cloth. Peter noticed something gleaming in the gloomy light, catching his attention. He swam a bit closer to see that the small amount of sun filtering from the surface through the cracks and holes in the walls was illuminating something that was underneath a pile of boxes. His heart sped up as he neared the wreckage. There, under the pile, was a crushed and broken chest. Scattered around it were a spectacular collection of jewels and shiny coins, the like of which he'd never seen before. Peter forgot all about his tether and the canister on his shoulders, as well as his brother working a short distance away. He only saw the dimly visible treasure that was just lying for the taking in front of him. He raked his fingers through the pile of coins and picked one up to bring it close to the glass of his face mask so he could see it better. Gold. It was certainly a gold coin. They all were. He was rich, he thought in his head. He ran his hand across the jewelry and precious trinkets. Richer than the Tsar. Peter's hands fell upon a large diamond-encrusted cross with a golden chain. The cross was the size of his hand that was made from a silvery pink metal. He pulled the cross toward him. The chain suddenly caught on something underneath, and he wasn't able to easily loosen it. He wanted that cross and had no patience to move the mess around it to dislodge the necklace. Instead, he just pulled harder. He didn't want to break the chain, but really what did it matter if he did? It was the cross with all its diamonds he was after. That piece would easily bring in a Kingsley price. He pulled and pulled, deciding that he didn't care if he broke it. Crash! The chain didn't break, but what was attached to it came loose and triggered the crates, along with a stored cannon barrel, to come rolling down upon him. His face mask took the brunt, and it instantly cracked as he was pressed to the floor by the collapse. The heavy iron cannon barrel rolled to settle on his chest, pinning him underneath the wreckage. Stefan burst through the surface next to the tugboat, yelling in Russian, startling all on board. Black Caesar grabbed the man's arm and pulled him aboard like he was lifting a child. Stefan was shouting and pointing toward the water while everyone gathered around to see what the matter was. "Slow down and speak English, Stefan," Beekman yelled at the frantic diver. Stefan took 3 deep breaths before speaking. "Peter, he is stuck. Down. In ship. Many boxes. Cannon fall on him. Can't move them by myself." "Does he still have air? Can he breathe?" Philip asked. "For moment, yes," Stefan answered, panting. "We need to get him up before the air in his tank is too stale to breathe. There is another tank and hose, but someone strong needs to go," Philip said, looking at Black Caesar. Black Caesar shook his head. "Don't like to be underwater." "You've spent a life at sea." "Don't matter. Sailors don't trust the water underneath," Charlotte told the scientist. Philip looked around at all the sailors on board, pirates and Beekman's crew. They all turned their eyes away. He sighed in frustration. If it was strength that was needed, it couldn't be him to go. He looked again at Black Caesar. "It must be you. You're the strongest. It's your ship." "Blackbeard's ship," Black Caesar said quickly. "But you know it best," Philip said. Black Caesar looked off into the water with trepidation, then at the desperate look on Stefan's face. "Ah!" Black Caesar exclaimed, giving in. "If I drown in this icy bay, know this, little scientist. I will haunt you for your next 7 lives. "Let's get him down there, then. Get him one of those barrels of air," Charles Vane said, slapping Black Caesar on the back. "You are a strong man as well," Black Caesar growled at Vane. "Yes, but nothing like the likes of you, my friend," Vane said with a smile. Black Caesar shook his head as Stefan brought him the spare diving equipment. The suit was much too small for him, so he was left with the weight belt, air canister, and helmet to dive with. Stefan quickly showed him how to breathe through the helmet and the rules of the hose. Black Caesar had no time to practice with the equipment as time was running out for Peter. Stefan jumped into the bay and trod water as he watched Black Caesar ease his feet into the cold sea with a shocked face. "Think warm thoughts, my friend," Vane said, leaning close to him, then pushed him off the edge of the boat. Black Caesar let out a yelp as his body submerged below the surface. Black Caesar was in a state of panic as he sunk quickly down. He was about to start swimming for the surface when Stefan appeared in front of him. Stefan put his hands on Black Caesar's shoulders and gave him a calming look, nodding his head. Looking up, they could see the hull of the tugboat rapidly becoming a distant shadow. A moment later, they touched bottom with a muted thump as clouds of sand and silt rose around them. They carefully moved out of the cloud, trying not to disturb the bottom any more than was necessary. Stefan used a hand signal to point out the wreck, and the 2 divers made their way to the sunken ship. Black Caesar forgot about panicking and how cold the water was once he saw the Queen Anne's Revenge lying on the bottom only 20 yards away. The ship was massive from this perspective, rising up higher than many buildings. He made his way toward the hole in the side of the ship that had a hose leading out of it and up to the tugboat, Peter's lifeline. He watched as Stefan carefully made his way inside the hole, pulling his own air hose to make sure it didn't kink or tear on the broken wood of the entrance. Black Caesar copied what Stefan did and pulled himself inside the hull. At first, it didn't seem that there would be enough light to see by, but then his eyes started to adjust to the murky interior. He could make out the figure of Stefan hovering over a pair of legs sticking out from a pile of wreckage. Black Caesar half walked, half swam to the Russian brothers. Peter lay underneath debris consisting of wood, cloth, and sacks filled with assorted goods, And of course, the one thing Stefan was unable to move himself, a 1,200-pound cannon barrel. Black Caesar was able to see Peter's face through the cracked glass plate of his helmet. The Russian's eyes fluttered open, which let Black Caesar know the man was still alive. Water was creeping through the crack in the glass and mixing with blood from a cut on Peter's head. The blood-water mixture had halfway filled the helmet, covering the back of Peter's head up to his ears. It wouldn't be long before the helmet was as useless as a fishbowl full of water. Stefan had moved everything he could that wasn't being held down underneath the cannon. Now, if they were going to free Peter, they would have to work together to lift the iron barrel. Stefan went to the opposite side of Black Caesar and wrapped his arms around the cannon barrel. Black Caesar did the same. The two men looked at each other through their faceplates, and Black Caesar mouthed, "Go," and they both strained to lift the barrel. Stefan's feet slipped out from under him and sent him thrashing down on top of the barrel, causing Peter to struggle in pain with the added weight. Stefan quickly rolled off and regained his footing. They prepared to try again. Both men grimaced through their face masks as they strained to lift the cannon with difficulty, even as the barrel was lighter in the water. At first it wasn't moving at all. Then Black Caesar tilted his head back and gave a roar that Stefan could hear through the water and the helmet. The cannon lifted an inch, then two. Then Black Caesar, with a burst of strength, lifted it high over Stefan's head. Stefan ducked out of the way as Black Caesar swung the barrel away from Peter and let it fall harmlessly away from the injured man. Peter immediately put his hands to his chest, holding his ribs and rolling to the side. The man's ribs must be broken, thought Black Caesar. They would have to carry him up to the surface. He and Stefan each grabbed an arm and lifted the man to float off the floor of the ship. Something underneath the man caught Black Caesar's eye as it glimmered. He took hold of the item and slipped it into his shirt. When Peter turned his head, they could see his face now was completely under water within the helmet. The man was panicking and began pulling the helmet off his head. Stefan pulled the hose from Peter's tank and bubbles emerged from it. Once the busted helmet was off, Stefan put the hose to Peter's mouth so he would be able to take in a breath of air. The three men dropped their weight belts and swam to the opening in the ship's side. Stefan helped Peter through and started to bring his brother to the surface. Black Caesar pushed his way through next, but wasn't paying good enough attention to his air hose. It became caught between the broken joists of the hull. He tried to free it, but it was wedged tight. He was desperate to surface and pulled hard on the hose. Snap! The hose was cut in two by the sharp wood, and bubbles of air emerged out of the ends. Black Caesar stared as the air rushed out from the canister strapped to his shoulders. He took in several quick breaths before the water started to rush in. He wiggled out of the harness, holding the air tank, and ripped off his mask and swam frantically toward the surface. Stefan broke through the water 10 yards from the tugboat and started yelling for help as the crew threw him a rope. He was able to grab hold, and the men and women pulled him and his brother toward the boat. The two men were pulled aboard, and they carefully laid Peter on the deck. The man began coughing and spitting up water, but it was a relief that he was alive. "Where's Caesar?" Tom asked. "He should be behind us," Stefan said worriedly. Tom, Vane, Charlotte, and Mary peered over the side, searching the water for Black Caesar. They moved around the railing, looking for any sign of the man. "You left him down there, you bilge rat," Vane said, turning back to yell at Stefan. No, he was right behind us," Stefan stuttered out. The pirates searched the waters, worried looks on their faces. As the crew joined the search, the tugboat gently rocked and all were silent. Bang! Something thudded against the side of the tug. "He's here!" Tom yelled out from the bow of the boat. Everyone crowded around as Black Caesar emerged from underneath. Vane extended his hand down to the big man who grasped it, out of breath. Vane pulled, and with the help of 3 other men, lifted Black Caesar over the side to roll, waterlogged, onto the deck. He turned over onto all fours and spit out the seawater from his lungs and mouth. Cold. Black Caesar shivered as he spoke. "Get the man a blanket," Beekman called out, and a deckhand quickly brought one. Black Caesar sat against the rail, wrapped in the blanket as everyone stared at him. "Stop hovering like a bunch of wet nurses," he growled. "Did the man Peter live?" "Aye, only thanks to you," Mary said. Black Caesar just nodded his head. Vane knelt on his haunches next to him. "So you get them bladders in the hold? Otherwise you gotta go back down there, mate." "Never again, you go." "The ship is cursed. Leave it to its watery grave," Stefan said, standing up. "It almost killed us all." Captain Blackbeard wants his ship back, Tom yelled. You gonna go down there, lad? Beekman asked. I go. I'm not scared, Tom said, puffing out his chest. No one's going down there. Not worth the money, not worth the risk, Beekman said. Black Caesar got to his feet. He looked down at Peter, who was watching everyone and beginning to sit up, holding his ribs in pain. He then looked at the crowd. There is treasure down there. He's seen it. Black Caesar pointed at Peter. Do I lie? Peter shook his head. The treasure is Blackbeard's, but I be his first mate, and can promise you all an equal share. Help us raise this ship, and you will all be rich from this day forward. The crew all looked to each other, unsure of what to do. Most turned toward Captain Beekman for direction. What kind of treasure we talking about? Beekman asked. Black Caesar reached into his shirt and pulled out the cross that had almost cost Peter his life and held it up for all to see. The men of the crew, Beekman, even the other pirates practically salivated at the sight of the precious work of art. Do we raise the ship, or do we sail back, safe and sound, but poor? Black Caesar asked, showing the cross around. Everyone's eyes were firmly on the prize. Aye, said Beekman. We raise the ship.